Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm Sharri Markson. US President Joe Biden calls for global outrage at the horrific rapes and sexual cruelty by Hamas as Israel marches south through Gaza and closes in on a terrorist leader. A Jewish college student will share how the Israel war on Hamas is fueling anti-Semitism on his campus later. Liberal leader Peter Dutton will join me on the show tonight to respond to the breaking news a fourth former detainee has now been arrested. And former Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews employed more staff in his office than the Prime Minister and New South Wales Premier combined. Steve Price will be on in a moment to break this down and other findings from the Integrity Ombudsman. But first tonight to that breaking news, a fourth former detainee has now been charged following his arrest in Melbourne today. The 45-year-old Sudanese-born man was arrested at a Melbourne hotel after he allegedly breached the conditions of his Commonwealth visa last Friday by failing to observe his curfew obligations. He's the fourth to be charged and arrested after being released by the High Court from indefinite detention. There's also allegations that he was involved in the theft of luggage from the airport. This is a huge concern for the community and the government needs to be held accountable. But instead, we saw today a cabinet minister explode at journalists who were demanding answers about the government's new preventative detention laws, which have now passed the Senate. Well, finally, ministers came out of hiding. They decided to front the media after 4 criminals, including a child sex predator, allegedly reoffended. But the press conference was a disaster, with Attorney General Mark Dreyfus unleashing at Sky News journalist Olivia Casely when she asked whether the government would apologise to the alleged victims of these crimes.
Do you owe an apology to those in the community that have been subjected to misdeeds by some of these individuals?
Olivia, the reason that these people have been released from immigration detention is because the High Court has made a decision that means it is illegal for us to continue to detain them.
I want to suggest to you that that question is an absurd question. You are asking a cabinet minister, 3 ministers of the Crown, to apologise for upholding the law of Australia, for acting in accordance with the law of Australia, for following the instructions of the High Court of Australia. I will not be apologising for upholding the law. I will not be apologising for pursuing the rule of law, and I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt. I will not be apologising for acting. I will not be apologising for acting in accordance with a High Court decision. Your question is an absurd one.
He tells Olivia Casely not to interrupt. He points his finger at her, telling her off. How dare he speak to a female journalist like this? How patronising. And this is the Attorney General who wants to bring in misinformation laws and censor the media with laws, not just wagging fingers. This government expects the press gallery to be subservient to them. It's unbelievable. Olivia Casely is an impressive journalist. She's a polite but tough questioner. She's not rude, and she asked an excellent question on behalf of the Australian public. Does he think he's her parent or school teacher? No workplace would condone a boss or anyone wagging their finger at a colleague, and Mark Dreyfus isn't Olivia Casely's superior. He's answerable to the public. He serves the public. And Olivia is asking questions on behalf of Australians. Albanese has instituted this code of telling journalists not to interrupt during press conferences. Imagine politicians telling Laurie Oakes or Margot Kingston not to interrupt press conferences. That's what's absurd, not Olivia's question. Dreyfus doesn't get to decide which questions are legitimate and which are not. Just let's have a look at that extraordinary spray again from the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus.
And I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt. I will not be apologising for acting. I will not be apologising for acting in accordance with a High Court decision. Your question is an absurd one.
And in any case, that wasn't an absurd question. The exchange was raised at the start of question time in the Senate today.
In an extraordinary press conference today, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and Ministers Clare O'Neill and Andrew Giles refused to apologise to any members of the Australian community who were subjected to misdeeds by some of the detainees that your government released into our community. Will the Prime Minister apologise?
This is a serious issue, and I understand, that the government understands that Australians are concerned about community safety. We understand and are similarly appalled by reports of re-offending by those that the High Court required us to release. And I do express my thoughts to those who have been impacted by the court-ordered release of this cohort. You've heard me say in here many times in various contexts that everyone deserves to feel safe and to live in safety.
And if you were watching this program last night, you'll remember that we spoke about how the government owes the alleged victims of the criminals released into the community an apology. We spoke about how there's no escaping that it was a clear failure by the Albanese government not to have legislation ready to go ahead of the High Court decision. This means that every alleged victim of these criminal detainees is now on Albanese's head and conscience. Clearly, his government owes the alleged victims an apology, and a major apology. The Albanese government's incompetence is why a woman in Northern Adelaide has allegedly been sexually assaulted and why children have potentially been put at risk by an alleged registered child sex offender. So today, finally, Clare O'Neill and Andrew Giles and Mark Dreyfus came out of hiding, but there was no apology, and instead there was outrage at the mere suggestion that they were at fault. Deputy Opposition Leader Susan Ley has criticised Dreyfus's rage-fuelled blow-up.
It's not acceptable. It shouldn't happen. He, particularly as the first law officer of this land, should not be shouting, raising his voice and speaking in such a derogatory tone to a young woman who's a female journalist doing her job. And what I'm asking for, Andrew, is that he says sorry.
And at least two members of the Canberra Press Gallery, James Massola at the Herald and James Morrow here at Sky News, have said on Twitter that if it was a coalition figure who had spoken to a female journalist like that, there'd be a riot and there'd be accusations of misogyny. Nothing, by the way, from Labor women about how Dreyfus spoke to Olivia Caisley. And Peter Dutton will be joining me on the show in just a moment to speak about this. So, as I said, the government ministers came out of hiding today, no apology, but there was no transparency either. The ministers refused to reveal exactly how many criminals their new preventative detention legislation would apply to, despite several journalists asking them the same question.
Can I ask on the preventative detention legislation, how many of the released detainees will you make immediate applications for to the court?
We've already begun working through the worst offenders to make sure that we can do everything we can to keep the community safe, ensuring, of course, that we are putting in place effective applications to the court, which involves, as I'm sure you would appreciate, working very closely with the states.
We're going to run an orderly press conference here, please.
And the Home Affairs Minister, Clare O'Neill, clearly feeling the pressure, was grilled on why she'd gone into hiding on the day that news emerged that 3 criminals had allegedly reoffended. And now this breaking news that a Sudanese-born man has become the 4th detainee to be charged after being released from indefinite detention. Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume attacked Clare O'Neill for her and Albanese and the others going missing in action just yesterday.
Where have you been for the last few days? We've had to find out about these released detainees from television, from media. We've had to find out from the radio. Australians have been put at risk because of the decisions that you have made, and you have gone to ground.
Well, now we're learning more detail about one of the criminals released into the community after the High Court decision. A child sex offender has been charged with 3 counts of having contact with a juvenile, and using Instagram and TikTok and even a live chat facility in breach of his reporting obligations. According to The Australian, Emran Dad was the ringleader of a child exploitation group that preyed on children in state care. And he faced court yesterday on 9 charges, including making contact with a child without a reasonable excuse. Then there was also the 65-year-old Afghan refugee who allegedly assaulted a woman in an Adelaide motel on Saturday evening, and then a third man, Muhammad Ali Nadari, who was arrested for drug possession. And now again, this news breaking just as we came on air tonight, a 4th man charged and arrested for breaching his visa conditions. These criminals are among 147 released from detention. And while the government celebrated the passing of its preventative detention laws today, a lineup of ministers, as I mentioned, refused to say how many of these 147 would be back behind bars as a result of their new laws. This lack of transparency, just the latest farce in this ongoing episode of ineptitude. All right, let's bring in now Sky News host Steve Price. Steve, a 4th immigration detainee now arrested. This is just getting worse for the government, but I want to ask you about that unbelievable performance by the Attorney General, the highest law officer in our land, and how he spoke to Olivia Caisley today.
Mark Dreyfus was disgraceful today, and he's a KC, King Counsel, senior lawyer. He didn't even understand Olivia's question. She was asking for him to apologise to the Australians who have been put at risk by the release of these people. She wasn't asking him to apologise for them all getting out. She was talking about, at the time of the media conference, the 3 who are now alleged to have been involved in incidents after being released, and now a 4th. And so he blew up for no other reason. Now, if he'd been wagging his finger, as you say, at someone like a Laurie Oakes, I mean, Laurie would have given it back to him by both barrels. Olivia was much more polite. I would have told him to stop pointing your finger at me. And there needs to be a calling out of the arrogance of this bloke. He hates it. He's got a glass jaw. He's shown it in question time and time again. He should come out tonight and apologise personally to Olivia. He should apologise to all of the media who were at that media conference. But you know what? He's an arrogant senior lawyer in a government under pressure that has completely stuffed this up, and he won't have the courage to do it.
And look, Olivia Caisley is a strong, tough journalist. She wouldn't be expecting an apology. She's not upset. She's tough. But the point is, as you say, the way he spoke to her, he wouldn't, I mean, you say, he wouldn't speak to Laurie Oakes like that, or if he did, Laurie would give it back to him. But I just don't think he would speak to a senior male journalist like that. I think he's done it because it's a female journalist. I think not only is it patronising, but it's sexist. And I agree with you. He should apologise for the behaviour. And if it was a coalition figure, well, the Labor women would be slamming that coalition man for speaking to a woman like that. Now, former Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews it's been revealed that he employed an office of over 80 people. This is according to a new report from the Integrity Watchdog, the Commissioner, Deborah Glass. This is about the same number of staff as both the Prime Minister and the New South Wales Premier's office put together. The Ombudsman also found that the work of Victoria's public servants was being compromised and that there was a culture of fear and political secrecy. Steve, what did you make of these findings and then the response from the Victorian government today?
It's a 2-year investigation by the Ombudsman, and what she's found is confirmed what many Victorians have known for a very long time, that Daniel Andrews was running a protection racket out of his own office right through the years of COVID and before and since, and what he was doing was sidelining senior public servants, and his office was making the big calls. Now, he's blown out the budget. I mean, Victoria's total debt is going to be somewhere around $265 billion in 3 years' time. And so what you didn't have was senior public servants examining projects and saying, hang on, I don't think we should be doing this. It's not going to work. It's going to cost too much. The suburban rail loop's a classic example. So what Andrews did was stack his office with an extraordinary number of staff. And as you say, it totals the total number in the PM's office and the New South Wales Premier put together. and Daniel Andrews has been caught out. But of course, Sharri, what's happened to Daniel Andrews? Well, he's walked away with a lovely pension. He's gone off into the twilight, and he's left the mess for the new Premier, Jacinta Allen, to clear up. And I think she's having a lot of trouble getting rid of some of these people who are in that office, and she wants a fresh start, but it's going to be very difficult. But that 200-page report, there's a lot more that's going to come out of that about the secret operations that Dan Andrews was running and snubbing the people of Victoria and costing us billions of dollars.
Look, Jacinta Allen is looking like quite a weak leader, what we've seen of her so far. It was very weak condemnation of Sunday's Nazi rally in Ballarat, that, you know, quite intimidating picture of those masked men walking down the main street. And then again, when it came to the families of the Israeli hostages who were staying at the Melbourne Hotel, the Crown Plaza, last week, her police minister didn't even send officers down when the Israeli ambassador was on the phone twice saying, you need to send police here to protect these Israeli families. What do you think of how she's governing and how she's handling the issue of anti-Semitism so far?
Well, I said last night that she's using weasel words, and she is. I mean, what Jacinta Allen, the problem she has is she comes from the hard left in Victoria, and she knows that if she starts saying, oh, well, I want my police officers to go and arrest people like those cowards that were masked up in Bendigo, Ballarat, I should say, on Saturday, when she says that, she's then opening the door for police to go and arrest people who are in pro-Palestinian rallies that are chanting anti-Semitic chants, or people who are marching through the streets about global warming and climate change. So she knows that she can't do it because it's not in her political DNA to do that. What she should have said after Saturday in Ballarat was the police should have gone in, the police should have ordered those men to take those masks off if they didn't. And we have anti-bikie laws in this state. You can't have motorcycle riders with colours on their backs getting together. So why have you got people with masks on their faces? They should be fined, and she's got to get tougher. Otherwise, this stuff is going to get worse and worse and worse.
I completely agree. It seems in many cases the laws are in place. It's just that police aren't enforcing them. Steve Price, thank you so much for joining me. Now, coming up, Peter Dutton will join us live on whether Labor's losing its grip on this detainee debacle. We'll also bring you the latest from the Bruce Lerman defamation trial. The court has heard that Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lerman were touchy and kissing in a bar on the night in question. Stay tuned. All right, let's bring in now Opposition Leader Peter Dutton in Canberra. Peter Dutton, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Sharri. Pleasure.
Look, I want to get your reaction first to this outburst from the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, today. He wagged his finger at a reporter, a female reporter, our Sky News colleague, Olivia Casely. He told her her question was absurd when she asked whether the government should apologise to the alleged victims of the criminals who have now allegedly reoffended. Do you think that was a fair enough question? And what did you make of his response?
Well, Sharri, there's no question it was a fair enough question. The response I thought was outrageous, and it demonstrated to me a man who's under great pressure, who knows that he's got it wrong and knows that this government has made a very serious error that's resulted in at least one Australian being sexually assaulted, and there are many others out there at the moment who have serious criminal histories, and there will be a lot of Australians worried that further offences will be committed. I don't understand where Tanya Plibersek has been, or Katie Gallagher or Penny Wong or others out there calling out this misogynistic behaviour by the Attorney-General, but it was completely unacceptable. And you know you've got it pretty wrong when you get Claire O'Neill calling you up for bad conduct. But that's exactly what she did today. She tried to silence the Attorney-General because she knew that he'd gone too far, and she tried to move the conversation on as quickly as she could.
Look, Labor's introducing new preventative detention laws. Do you expect that they'll be strong enough to put the worst of the criminals, the 147 who've been released, back behind bars?
Well, I certainly hope that's the case, and we've tried to strengthen what was a very poor bill to start with. We want to make sure that these people are back in detention. They shouldn't be out in the community in the first place. The court hasn't ordered the release of these individuals. Let's be very clear. The minister has made a decision to release these individuals. It was unnecessary, and it has resulted in harm to the Australian community, and that causes me, and I'm sure many other Australians, a great deal of grief, because I don't want to see Australians put at harm, and that's exactly what has happened here. The Minister for Immigration, Mr Giles, and the Home Affairs Minister, Ms O'Neill, should be sacked. There's no question about that, and this fourth individual now has been arrested. I think we'll see more arrests, and I think the Albanese government has completely lost control of this issue.
Well, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, she hasn't given a media appearance for a couple of days. She did in that press conference today, but she rubbished the claim that her government only had to release one detainee initially because of the High Court decision. She says that they always had to release 140. Why do you think that's not the case?
Well, it's not just 140. They were talking about 340 at one stage. So what's happened to those individuals? Are they about to be released? Are they waiting for Parliament to finish before they release those individuals? Again, there's no transparency here. The Prime Minister's gone to ground. He won't do press conferences. He won't answer questions in relation to these issues. He won't repeat the outrageous slurs that the ministers say under parliamentary privilege or in the public domain. This is a government that's rattled, and the wheels are coming off, and this is a weak and woke Prime Minister who won't stand up for Australia's best interests, and I think that's why people are marking him down at the moment. But in relation to the individuals, the High Court found in relation to one case. It didn't find in relation to other cases. Now, the government will argue, well, if there are similar facts in other cases, then the decision will hold for those individuals as well. But the distinguishing factor here, at least, without knowing the details of each of the cases, is that there is an opportunity for these individuals, whether they're stateless or whether they are from a country where at the moment they can't be returned, that there is opportunity to find third country settlement options for those people. It's exactly what we did when we were in government, and we didn't have these problems of Labor's making. And the High Court has ruled because the Minister agreed to a fact that he should not have agreed to. The Attorney-General allowed the Human Rights Commission for the first time to make submissions in relation to this matter, which no doubt has been instructive for the High Court as well, when the Attorney-General gives permission for the Human Rights Commission to make a submission to the High Court. Christian Porter and Michaelia Cash, previous holders of that office of Attorney-General, refused to allow those submissions to be made, and this has been botched right from the start.
Look, another area where the government is struggling is to try and deal with this explosion in anti-Semitism we're seeing on our streets. Just yesterday, Israel issued a warning to its citizens saying that it wasn't safe to fly to Australia, among other countries, because of the anti-Semitism here. What do you think about how Albanese has handled this, and what should he be doing?
Well, Sharri, I feel as a nation that we've been let down by our Prime Minister. We're now on the list with Russia and with other countries, and we shouldn't be on that list. We should be on the list that is very proud to talk about us as a country who is welcoming, tolerant, and talks down and deals very, very sternly with acts of anti-Semitism. But the government just hasn't put their words into action. There is an opportunity, because there was a National Cabinet meeting today, and we've been calling on the Prime Minister for a couple of weeks, that this meeting should have had on the agenda the issue of anti-Semitism, because there should have been a strong statement that came out from the Premiers and the Chief Ministers and the Prime Minister that we don't have any tolerance whatsoever for anti-Semitism in our country. We can't have kids going to school, to Jewish schools, or people going to a synagogue, or people going to a neighbourhood where there are a large number of Jewish residents, or people going to a supermarket frequented by people of Jewish faith. We can't have a situation where people are doing that and they don't feel safe, or that they're being targeted. This is a Prime Minister that needs to stand up and send a very clear message, and the Premiers need to instruct the police that if there are neo-Nazi lunatics or others on the hard left who are out there peddling this nonsense, that they should be dealt with according to the law. And that's exactly what should have been the direction today from the Chief Ministers and the Prime Minister, and it didn't happen.
I mean, I reported on the show last night that there was a group of 13-year-old girls at a shopping centre in Sydney who experienced an anti-Semitic incident because they were in their Jewish school uniform. That's how bad it's getting. I'm interested, do you think that Comments from senior government ministers that implicitly accuse Israel of war crimes. They continue to lecture Israel about its military strategy, the anti-Israel bias we're seeing in the ABC. Do you think all of this is also fueling this rise of anti-Semitism?
Yes, I do. And I think on our university campuses as well, we've got a hotbed of activity there of anti-Semitic behaviour, and it hasn't been called out. The Education Minister hasn't called it out. The Prime Minister hasn't called it out. There should be a radical shake-up of the way in which our kids are being taught, impressionable young minds, some of whom go on to be teachers in preschools or primary schools or secondary schools. And they are influenced, no doubt, by the rhetoric and the fanaticism of some of those lecturers and tutors within that environment. So I think there are many levels where there needs to be leadership to call it out, and it's utterly unacceptable that people should be targeted because of their religious belief or because they're associated with Israel. It is disgusting. It's humiliating for our country to be on that list, and we shouldn't tolerate it.
No. Very strong words, and you know, we haven't even mentioned, I mean, you refer to students, but the role of teachers as well, and how they're trying to bring this conflict, this war into the classroom is disgraceful. Peter Dutton, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks very much, Sharri. Thank you.
Now, US President Joe Biden has called on international organisations which have been silent on the brutal rape of Israeli women by Hamas to unequivocally condemn it. He said that the world can't just look away at what's going on, and he wasn't alone. A string of US officials made this same point today.
The fact that it seems one of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason this pause fell apart, is they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them.
It is outrageous that some who claim to stand for justice are closing their eyes and their hearts to the victims of Hamas.
When I saw the list of women's rights organizations who have said nothing, I nearly choked. Where is the solidarity for women in this country and in this world to stand up for our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters?
And we think about, rape and the use of rape as being used as a weapon. That is also reprehensible.
It was only just last week that the UN Secretary General and the UN Women Group finally issued statements on the Hamas rapes and brutality towards Jewish women, only after overwhelming pressure. This is despite the fact that from the very moment the October 7 terror attacks occurred, we sadly saw evidence of sexual violence, with witness accounts and video evidence only mounting since then. The latest, a video that played on Israeli television of an Israeli lawyer, just 41, being captured by Hamas. It took 7 terrorists to hold her down. They covered her in a white sheet. A warning, this footage is distressing. And you just shudder to think what they did to her. We spoke last night about the survivor of the music festival who watched as a woman was brutally gang raped and then had her head cut off. If you can handle reading it, that chilling story by journalist Christina Lamb in The Australian and the UK Sunday Times. Evidence has also emerged now that Hamas drugged hostages before they released them so that they'd appear calm or even upbeat when they were filmed by the media entering Israel. Despite all this horrific treatment, the international institutions have been silent and weak, failing to stand up for Jewish women. And the woke left has been the same. On Monday night, we played you this horrific footage of college students at the University of Pennsylvania shouting Intifada.
They're saying Israel is
So the woke left calling for a violent uprising against Jews. We've seen shocking anti-Semitism in universities globally. As we keep speaking about on the show, part of the reason we're seeing this explosion of hatred towards Jews is because of a weakness of political leadership, a lack of courage. They put politics ahead of moral conviction. And so it is not just with political leaders, but the leaders at universities as well. Presidents of Ivy League colleges don't even have the mettle to call out anti-Semitism. Their shocking responses are a clear reflection of just how much racism against Jewish people is now accepted in society. Have a look at this next clip. These people, I'm saying they are appalling people. The presidents of Harvard University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the University of Pennsylvania. This video is them testifying in Capitol Hill in front of New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman. If it if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals.
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Now, imagine if you replace the question they were asked with trans, gay, or Indigenous people. Does the genocide of trans, gay, or Indigenous people violate your university's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying or harassment? I mean, people can get cancelled or fired for misgendering someone, but not for calling for the genocide of Jews. I despair. Well, one brave student at the University of Pennsylvania is Eyal Yacobi. He's been standing up against this racism, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for your time. Look, firstly, what are you seeing at the University of Pennsylvania?
Thank you so much for having me on. I am very appreciative that Sky News played the clip of President McGill having no response other than it depends on context when asked about whether or not calling for the genocide of Jews violates the code of conduct for students. So I'd like to actually provide that very context that she's looking for. In the past 2 months at Penn, there has been a swastika drawn on campus. There have been bomb threats made against Hillel. A Jewish student was accosted. Jews are Nazis was etched next to the Jewish fraternity house at Penn. A Jewish student was accosted. That is the context. And if that context is not enough for my president to immediately say, no, that is not okay, and yes, it violates our code of conduct, then I don't know what is at this point. Because it seems like there has been a ton of actions and context provided to her.
Look, we just saw the vision of the protest that took place at your university, where your fellow students, young people, are calling for an intifada. You know, how pervasive is this sentiment among your fellow students?
Not just students. Professors are leading these chants. It is definitely not just students. And I would like to provide a little bit more than just intifada being directed towards Jews specifically. What these calls are is global intifada. It is not against just Jews. In intifada, there were 2 of them in Israel, which resulted in the mass deaths of Jews and non-Jews. They indiscriminately bombed buses and stabbed people. This has nothing to do with Jews. It has to do with the targeting of innocent civilians. And if people understood what global intifada means, it would stretch far beyond just the Jewish community being scared.
Absolutely. Eyal Yacobi, thank you so much for speaking out, for your strength, for your very articulate, clear words there, and stay strong on campus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, a 4th former detainee has been arrested in Melbourne. Andrew Charlton and Bridget McKenzie will join me to discuss this detainee debate next. We're also going to have the latest bombshell revelations from the Bruce Lerman defamation trial. That's coming up. Welcome back. Well, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton just a moment ago on this program accused the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus of misogyny for these comments.
And I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt. I will not be apologising for acting. I will not be apologising for acting in accordance with a High Court decision. Your question is an absurd one.
Joining me now, National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and Labor MP for Parramatta, Andrew Charlton. Welcome to you both, as always, on a Wednesday. Bridget, do you think this performance by the Attorney General today shows that the government is feeling the pressure on this issue?
Well, I think it shows the Attorney General is incredibly arrogant. The way the government has handled this detainee issue from the start has been shambolic and chaotic, and now we have Australians being actual victims of crimes because of this government's decision-making. And instead of owning that, apologising and fixing it, he's choosing to treat, in this case, a fabulous female journalist who was doing her job, asking tough questions of the government, and he's somehow offended that he has to own the responsibility for the decisions he and other government ministers have made on this debacle of an incident.
Andrew Charlton, do you want to respond to that? I mean, it seems like in this instance, the handling by Claire O'Neill, by Andrew Giles, by the Prime Minister, by Mark Dreyfus today has just been one fiasco after another.
Well, Sharri, we have a bill before the House of Representatives right now, and the situation that we're in as a government is we have the Greens on one side and the Teals telling us that we're moving too slowly to address this issue, that we're rushing it. And on the other side, we have Bridget's party, the Liberals, telling us that we're going too slowly. So if you've got one party telling us you're going too slowly, the other one telling us you're going too quickly, I think probably what's really going on is we have it about right.
Well, tell that to the victims.
The government moved quickly as soon as the High Court told us that the legal framework that Bridget's party operated was unconstitutional. The government moved quickly to impose strict visa conditions on those individuals. And then, as soon as we got the High Court's reasoning for that decision, we moved quickly to put in place a new legal framework that would be constitutional to maintain the detention of these individuals. That is the piece of legislation that is in front of the House of Representatives today, and we're looking for the support of the Liberals for that bill so that we can maintain community safety.
Well, the fact is, Andrew, you haven't been able to maintain community safety. 148 were released. 4 have already alleged committed crimes in the last couple of weeks alone. And we've got 144 more out there. Pedophiles, alleged rapists, murderers, you name it, they're out there. And it is not because you are moving at about the right pace. The government knew back in June, following agreeing some facts and hearing from Justice Gleeson, they knew where this High Court decision would end up. And instead of doing the preparatory work required to ensure that if the High Court made the decision it did, that there were measures in place to be implemented straight away. Instead, they dilly-dallied. They said things were unnecessary and had to be dragged kicking and screaming to a legislative framework. So let's not pretend that Claire O'Neill, the Attorney-General and other ministers have been atop of this. The fact is it's been chaotic from where to go, and your Prime Minister has gone to ground.
All right, let's move on. Just a quick response and then let's move on to another topic.
I mean, unfortunately, Bridget, tough words don't keep the community safe. What keeps the community safe is constitutional laws. You didn't operate constitutional laws, and now arguing that we need to be tough.
You had to be dragged.
Those tough words.
We had to draft the legislation for you.
Having tough legislation that is constitutional is the only way that we keep the community safe. It's those actions, not words, that do that.
OK, let's move on to the economy now. The RBA decided to keep rates on hold at 4.35%. This is their final board meeting of the year. Meanwhile, the figures we've seen today, the GDP lifting by just 0.2% in the September quarter. Andrew, are you worried that inflation is become stickier in Australia than the rest of the world?
Look, I think the two pieces of information that we've had over the last couple of days in relation to the economy complement each other. We had slowing economic growth today, still positive, but slowing, and slowing as expected, in line with higher interest rates and the impact of global uncertainty on Australia. And that slowing economy is enabling the RBA to reduce the rate at which they are increasing interest rates, which will be welcome for many Australians suffering with higher cost of living and increased mortgage repayments. But Australians should feel confident that the Australian economy is strong. I mean, if we'd been sitting here 2 years ago, we would not have expected that Australian unemployment today would have a 3 in front of it, one of the lowest unemployment rates in Australia's history. And we probably wouldn't have expected that Labor would have been able to deliver the first budget surplus in 14 years. So Australians should be confident that our economy is strong, and we're doing better than most of our peers in the face of the inflation challenge that we inherited and the global uncertainties bearing down on us.
Well, Sharri, if I could just respond. I mean, the RBA governor's clear. We do have homegrown inflation. You can't blame overseas factors anymore. We're in an economic crisis, a GDP per capita recession. We've had incomes falling by 6.6%. Taxes have gone up 27%. Mortgages have tripled. Prices are up 9%. And Australians are being crushed and smashed economically at the moment as they head to Christmas. And this government, instead of focusing on that in the last 6 months and doing something to cut their spending, they've poured $450 million into their failed voice referendum, and they've been more interested in swanning around with celebrities than actually getting to the nub of the thing that is really hurting Australians, and that is this economic crisis that people are feeling. I mean, Andrew's got all the numbers, but the fact is if you are in households in suburbs today, they are feeling smashed, and for good reason.
Yeah, there's no question. Cost of living crisis continues to bite. Bridget McKenzie, Andrew Charlton, thank you both so much. Now, still to come, top legal mind Chris Merritt will join me to talk about explosive new revelations from the Bruce Lerman defamation trial today. That's after this quick break. A court today has heard that Bruce Lerman helped a drunk Brittany Higgins get back up after falling over before they allegedly kissed at a bar in Canberra. Former Liberal staffer Lauren Gain told the court, "I remember Brittany falling over and having to be helped back up. I remember them being quite touchy with one another. I remember them kissing, and I remember her taking selfies of the two of them." She said, "I remember his hands on her thighs and her hands on his thighs. It wasn't a peck, it was very much a kiss. As you know, Bruce Lerman is suing Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson for defamation over an interview involving Brittany Higgins that aired in 2021. Well, joining me now, the Australian's legal affairs contributor, Chris Merritt. Chris, thank you so much for your time. What were the main revelations from the court case today?
Well, it was more prurience, I'm afraid. That's the only way I would describe it. Apart from the
supposed incident of kissing. There was also the disclosure of text messages between Bruce Lerman and his former girlfriend about the breakup after these revelations. All the sort of material that you really don't want to know. It's private material, and it's found itself in the public domain in a case that really is about defamation, the erosion of someone's reputation. And we're descended into this prurience. It's not a good look.
I guess it was always going to emerge once this defamation action was taken. One of the big revelations yesterday that Brittany Higgins received $2.3 million, this compensation payment because she told the Commonwealth she wouldn't be able to work again for another 40 years. We know that this process excluded the people who were her bosses at the time, Linda Reynolds. What do you think about the revelations confirming that she's received over $2 million in taxpayer funds?
Well, it sounds a little bit smelly to me. For this reason, it's now known that financial coercion was used to exclude Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash from the mediation that led to that payout. These are the two former employers who could have contested or tested the accusations and protected the interests of the Commonwealth. Instead, they were excluded and the Commonwealth was required to make this payout. There's been no finding of misconduct at all. Linda Reynolds has referred this to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. I'm not sure what's going on there, but
whether or not they're investigating.
Exactly. But if the Commission doesn't investigate it, this is exactly the sort of thing that should come before an Ombudsman or an Auditor General. This is, on its face, it looks like the mediation was nobbled to ensure that the decision makers did not get a full story, that the views of former employers, the Commonwealth, were excluded and one side was given priority. Doesn't look good.
Now, Brittany Higgins snapped at a Channel 7 reporter outside of court yesterday. Here's what she had to say. Yeah, what did you make of both her credibility as a witness and also Bruce Lerman's?
Look, they've both been damaged. Both of them have admitted being loose with the truth in some aspects. Mr. Lerman has admitted or been accused of taking drugs. This is another example of why it's incredibly dangerous to launch defamation proceedings. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know how much damage is going to be inflicted on who. It's completely out of control. It's in the hands of the courts. I've advised multiple people, if they think about suing someone for defamation, to take a cold shower and then think about what it would be like to tear up $10,000 every month for years, and that's what it's about.
Or more if you have high-profile lawyers representing you daily. Chris Merritt, thank you so much for your insights on this case.
Quite okay.
Thanks everyone for watching today. I'll see you at 5 o'clock tomorrow. We've got another big show coming up, so don't miss it. And if you want to re-watch my interview with Peter Dutton from earlier tonight because his comments were very strong, you can check it out on the Sky News website. And here's Peter Credlin.